Hello, everyone. Please take your seats. I would just like to make some announcements for upcoming programs for the next 2 weeks. So tomorrow we have an outdoor concert. It's supposed to be outdoors. We're praying on the weather gods that it's outdoors, but in the occasion that it will not be held outdoors because of rain or thunder showers, it will be held in here in the auditorium. But in order to come into the concert, you need to have a rain pass. Those rain passes are available at the front desk in the library. It is two per person. Hopefully, we're praying that it will be outside at Chudo Park at 7 o'clock. Then on Monday, we were supposed to have Kathy Diamond, but Kathy Diamond, we have to cancel the program on Monday, so it will not be happening. Tuesday, we will have Bright Lights. It will be here again. The movie, I forgot what movie it was, but it's Bright Lights. Gail will be here and she will give an introduction. There will be the movie playing and then there will be a discussion. Next Wednesday again, we will have Mr. Dwoskin here again. And then Friday, the 24th, we will have Friday afternoons in the movie, okay? So here's Mr. Dwoskin. We will give out an announcement. We will give out an announcement either through the newsletter or Facebook page. You could also call the library if you're not sure. The decision will be made in the afternoon, sometime in the afternoon. But I suggest if you really want to attend the concert, you go and pick up those rain passes because if you wait last minute, there's no guarantees that you will have rain passes. Thank you.
Last night, um, the Cote-Saint-Luc, by the way, there is Israeli dancing on Monday nights at 7 o'clock at Rembrandt Park, and on Tuesday nights at Kirwan Park. And I looked at the weather forecast yesterday. It said no, it wasn't supposed to rain. It was supposed to rain at 5 o'clock, and then they took that away. Then they said, oh, it could rain at 10 o'clock. So I said, okay, 10 o'clock. So I come to Kirwan Park at 7 o'clock, and at 7:10 or 7:05, the rain just started to come. So I said, oh, yeah. So you can't always count on the weather forecast. But hi, everybody. I'm Hershey Dwoskin. I come and I speak about current events, and I have been doing this for so long. It's more than 50 years, actually, because I started in the 70s. And because the world changes all the time, there's always something new to talk about. So I don't have to worry that, we'll run out of things to speak about simply because everything changes all the time. So what I decided to do today, I actually had one topic in mind, and we'll see how that goes. But then again, I said to myself, at 3 o'clock, after this class is over, is the World Cup soccer semifinal between England and Argentina. And this will be very, very closely watched by people in Argentina and people in England, of course. And the rivalry between these two countries is politically is unsurpassed of any rivalry between any of the teams that have played in the World Cup so far. By the way, this year, for the first time, there were 48 different teams that started off the tournament, and now they're eliminated down to the last three. So whoever wins this game plays Spain for the final, and that will be the end on Sunday. So let's just talk about England and Argentina and find out why they're such rivals. And in doing that, I'd like to try to ask and answer some questions as follows. Why is it that a country that can be at one point so well off, the economy and the government and the people go from being well off to being poor? Usually things go the other way around. People start off poor and become better off. In the case of Argentina, it's exactly the other way around. It goes from being, poor well off to being poor. And then another question to answer is about immigration. When immigration happens, does it happen? Does the fact of immigration happening make a country better off? Or is the country better off to start with and then it attracts immigrants? So that's a question to think about, roll around in your mind. And on that basis, we can now talk about the Argentina and England. So we all know that in the 19th century, in the 1800s, Great Britain was the strongest power in the world. It had the strongest military. It had the largest amount of possessions, colonies, territories. It had the strongest navy. It had the strongest economy because it was the very first place to industrialize, the first place in the world. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain. Steam power was invented in Great Britain. The locomotive was most advanced in Great Britain. Great Britain also had the largest amount of ships, and these ships then went to all the colonies that Great Britain had conquered and did trade with those colonies. And so it was a kind of a self-reinforcing economy. Great Britain produced goods. Those goods were sold in the colonies. Great Britain imported raw materials from the colonies. They were transformed into goods. And so this trade went in a kind of a circular way. Previous to that, in the 1700s, before the Industrial Revolution, there was a three-cornered trade involving Great Britain. And this unfortunately involved the slave trade. So Great Britain produced the Industrial Revolution hadn't happened at that time, but still Great Britain had a lot of goods, manufactured goods to sell. They took these manufactured goods to Africa. They sold the goods to slave traders, African slave traders, who brought slaves down to the coast. The slaves were then transported to North America, the Caribbean, and South America, where the slaves were used to grow raw materials, agricultural materials, especially sugar, but not only sugar, tobacco, cocoa, indigo, no, not cotton, not at the beginning anyway, but eventually cotton. And then those goods were brought back to Great Britain to be transformed, like you were saying, cotton, to be transformed into clothing. And so that was this triangular trade. So Great Britain became the most powerful nation in the world militarily and economically in the 19th century. And that power kind of lasted up until the First World War. We'll have to say the First World War was a transformative time. At that time already, and even just before that, the United States, through their size of the country, the size of their economy, the adoption of all the latest trends in railway production, food production, industrial production. Once the Civil War was over in the US really started industrializing seriously. And that's why, by 1900 or so, the US surpassed Great Britain in terms of economic size. But remember, Great Britain is physically a very small place. The US, of course, is a very big place. And Great Britain had a lack of a lot of things, especially size. So with the size of Great Britain, it couldn't produce enough food, not only for itself, but for them to export food. They didn't have the size. They didn't have the size to have all of the other products like lumber, timber, that you would get from a country that has a decent size. So that's why Great Britain, had strengths and weaknesses. And when it came to Argentina, you had a place that was in the 19th century, meaning in the 1800s, it was a place where the slave trade never really got going. Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay were countries that were not hot enough to grow the crops that were wanted and had high value. They didn't grow sugar, which was the most important crop, but any of the other tropical crops like cocoa or coffee couldn't grow there, or cotton, like you were saying before. So they didn't have a slave population that came to live in those countries or were brought there. And so these countries developed in a different way. They also didn't have, in speaking of Argentina only now, they didn't have any mineral resources of any special value. No gold, no silver. That's the most important things right off the bat. Copper. So Argentina was basically a country with lots of agricultural land, which was their main asset, and a large size, but nothing inherently useful for a colonial power. So Argentina, like all of South America except Brazil, was owned by Spain. And after the Napoleonic Wars, Spain was reduced to, Spain lost the Napoleonic Wars. Spain was allied with France. So France lost the Napoleonic Wars. So Spain lost the Napoleonic Wars. And because their colonies were so far away, and because the mother country was so weak, all of South America in the 1820s and Central America rebelled against Spain and became independent. For whatever reason, South America did not adopt the pattern of North America and join all the countries together to make a United States of South America. There were too many rivalries, too many competitions, too much power hungriness. And so each of the individual countries, after a couple of small experiments that failed, each of the individual countries became a country on its own. And that includes Argentina. So let's just talk about Argentina and Great Britain for a bit, and then we'll switch off to the main reason for the rivalry. So Argentina developed mainly as an agricultural country because they had so much good land. The pattern of Argentina is not dissimilar to Canada. In other words, you have great amount of prairies that are really good for a couple of things: growing grain and raising cattle. Because cattle need a lot of room to wander around, and grain, of course, needs a lot of room to be grown on. The climate of Argentina is moderate. It ranges, of course, from one place to another, from north to south. But the middle section of the country has a moderate climate, somewhat like you could call it the Great Plains of the US or southern Canada. And that's what gave the wealth of the country. So because there was not an enormous amount of indigenous people living in Argentina, they had them, but there weren't a lot of them. So the plains were open for Europeans to come in and settle. And Europeans did come in and settle there and started to grow the beef products and the grain products. But obviously, there was far too much land and far too much grain and far too much cattle for Argentina itself to consume. So they had to sell it and export it abroad. Now, who do you think were the main sources of export? Of course, it was Great Britain, because they were small. They had the biggest amount of ships. So Great Britain and Argentina developed a very strong trading relationship in the in the 19th century, in the 1800s. Now, interestingly, what happened was that Argentina became so wealthy because of this abundancy of resources, especially agricultural resources, that they attracted investment from Great Britain. What kind of investment? Railways, ports, transportation systems, electricity systems, building up the city of Buenos Aires, the capital city. Tremendous amounts of British money came in to invest in building up Argentina because of the trade between the two countries. And lots of British immigrants came to Argentina at first, to work in these industries and then just to live there and spread out and do their own thing. A fact that is not really all that well known is, there's a place in Great Britain called Wales, right? One of the British countries, as they call them. In Wales, they spoke Welsh in those days. Lots and lots of people from Wales went up to settle in Argentina. And because they were settling in small ports and small places, they continued to speak Welsh to this very day, I would say. They've got Welsh schools in Argentina that take teachers from Wales, bring them over so that they could, refresh and brush up and continue the culture of speaking Welsh in Argentina, which is, of course, now well over 100 years old. So besides the Welsh people, lots of English people came to live in Argentina and to become Argentinians eventually, and to develop the country and to work as immigrants. In other words, if you take the question of why do immigrants go from one place to another, and if the answer is because they want to better their lives, and if you can better your life in a place where the economy is prospering and growing and where you have stability, well, that explains the attraction of Argentina not only to British people, but to hundreds of thousands of Italians, Spanish, people from Spain, people from Portugal, people from Eastern Europe, Jewish populations who were fleeing from Russia and from the Tsar and from Poland, came to live in Argentina because it was a prosperous and stable place to live, both before the First World War, meaning from, we'll call it, say, the golden era from 1880s till the First World War, and then after the First World War, up until before the Second World War. So Argentina was a golden country for Europeans to come and settle in. And that's reflected today in the population of the country. Like hundreds of thousands of people have Italian names. They have Basque names, Spanish names, and English names. So if you look today, if you happen to watch, like I'm going to watch the soccer game, one of the great stars of the Argentinian soccer team, his name is McAllister. And in all likelihood, his parents didn't speak any English whatsoever. I did a trip, we'll get to this, but I did a trip to Patagonia. And in Patagonia, which is the bottom of Argentina, it's all sort of rolling hills, beautifully covered with grass. Just grass as far as the eye can see. No trees, just tons and tons and tons of grass. And we stopped at a sheep farm because grass and sheep go together. And the name of the owner of the farm was Day, D-A-Y. And their family had come to Argentina in the 1800s. The younger Day, because of tourism coming, learned to speak English with a strong Spanish accent. But, he had pictures of his grandparents in their house. And these people were English people with their tea sets and everything. So what it means is that Argentina was a country which attracted immigration from pretty well all over the world. Now, all over the world doesn't really mean all over the world. It means all of Europe, because just like America and Canada, they didn't take African immigrants, they didn't take Asian immigrants, they didn't take many Chinese immigrants or people from India. You know, they had the same rules and the same ideas that Argentina should be a white country. You know, that gave it the cachet of being, you know, European. And so immigration from non-white countries was strictly restricted. But the proof of the fact that Argentina was such a wealthy country is that in the 1920s, its standard of living and its wealth was the same as Great Britain's or the same as Canada. No different. People had cars. People had, they had all of the measures of standard of living that we would have here in those days. So you have to ask yourself the following question. If they were so well off then, how come today, and of course at that time, Argentina was the single richest country in South America by far. So how come today they've gone down so much that about 40% of the people in the country are considered at risk? They have a currency which has been devalued so many times, it's practically worthless. It has foreign debts so high that they've defaulted on their debt twice to the International Monetary Fund, the banks. And basically they're living hand to mouth. And yet the weather didn't change. The land didn't change. The natural resources in the country didn't change. So something must have changed to bring that country down. Whereas for places like Canada and the US and Great Britain from the 1930s, our countries went up. So the gap between Argentina and the other parts of the Western world is huge today. And so we have to say that the cause of this is not natural, the cause is human. And the cause is just bad leadership, politics. So a politician can bring a country down as well as bring a country up. And Argentina has suffered the fate of having one bad politician after another. I would have to say, if we bring ourselves to today, I'd say the book is open for the new president of Argentina. He hasn't been in there long enough to see, but he claims that he is going to turn the country around. So we'll have to see about that. So now let's talk about the conflict between England and Argentina, and why is it so severe? Because we know it's all because of the Falkland Islands. I had the privilege of visiting the Falkland Islands, I have to say, last year, and a lot of people do not get to go there. And it was really quite an experience. So the Falkland Islands are 2 large islands and 700 tiny little islands located 300 miles to the east of Argentina in the Atlantic Ocean. So they're in the South Atlantic Ocean. Now, if you go to the Falkland Islands, what you will see is a similar landscape to what I was describing before in Patagonia, the bottom of Argentina, meaning rolling hills, lots of grass, no trees. The islands are huge. They really are very, very large. There's a lot of empty space in the Falkland Islands. I think that, I'm not positive of this, but I think that the area is around 3,000 square miles, which is really very big. So it's a lot of land. Now in those huge pieces of territory, How many people are living there today? Less than in Cote-Saint-Luc, that's for sure. 3,500 people are living in this enormous space of land. So the history of the Falkland Islands, so we've described where they are. They're in the South Atlantic Ocean. So they're really, really close to the bottom of Argentina. So the weather there is always windy, cold, but not freezing, inhospitable, to say the least. Like I said, when you first get there and you look around, it's all just like, looks like just emptiness of rolling hills. And then if you come to the one and only town in the whole Falkland Islands, it's called Stanley. It has 2,500 people out of the 3,500 people who live in all of the Falkland Islands. So that means that the rest of it is like really, really empty. You see a house with a tree, with a couple of trees, and these trees are like half bent over like this. And, they're being protected with all kinds of little walls and little things around them so they don't get blown over. And, it's like they're struggling to exist as a tree because it's just so windy all the time. It's not particularly cold. It gets down to about -5 because they are, after all, in an ocean, right? So the ocean is all around them. But it never goes much above 12 or 13 or 14 degrees. So, that's their weather, like cold, rainy, windy, cold, rainy, windy the whole time. You get the idea of kind of what it's like. So these islands were uninhabited before the Europeans found them. The first guy who found them actually was a French explorer who left from the port of Saint-Malo. Anybody hear of that port, Saint-Malo? Because that's the place where all Quebec explorers came from, Saint-Malo. So from Saint-Malo, they got the name Malvinas. Malvinas is the Spanish name for those islands, those Falkland Islands. Because, in other words, the islands from Saint-Malo, Malvina. The Spanish and the British both had sort of settlements there in the 1820s. They both fought a little bit over the islands, but there was nothing much there to fight over. In the end, in the 1830s, Great Britain finally said, hey, enough is enough, and we're going to send our army and take over that place. And they did. Now, in the early days, whaling was their biggest industry, catching whales, which were down in Antarctica. And the Falkland Islands are only 700 miles from Antarctica. So it's not like super, super far. Ships could stop there. They had a decent port, not easy to get into when it is windy all the time. But when it's not windy, it's a decent port. And so whaling was a very profitable business for a very long time. People needed the oil that the whales had. The blubber was all boiled down into oil. And, that was an industry until it wasn't. Then they introduced sheep to the Falkland Islands, and sheep became the main industry because of wool. So the wool was exported to Great Britain, and wool was in huge demand for a long time until artificial fabrics were invented. And the wool was the basis of their industry. So, I spoke to one guy. He says, yeah, he has he has a sheep farm, 50,000 acres. 50,000 acres. Like you practically need an airplane to go from one end of his farm to another, which, by the way, is really interesting. So they do have airplanes. By the way, there are two main islands, East Falkland and West Falkland. And there's no bridge that connects the two islands. It's because there's no people to, to travel there. So you travel by plane from one settlement to another. But of course, there's not enough people to have a regular air service. So if you want to go someplace, then what you do is you call up the airline and you say, I want to go from Stanley to another place. Tell me when to show up and where to show up. And, then it's like a taxi. Call it like a taxi, but it's an airplane. So what he was saying, the guy was making a joke. He said, people can't have affairs in the Falkland Islands because the pilots know everything. Like, where are you going? What do you mean you're going to this place? What do you mean you're coming back the next morning? So that's what the guy was saying, that there's no secrets because of all the there's only two little airplanes in the whole place. So Great Britain established their rule over the Falkland Islands, but it was never recognized by Argentina because Argentina said, we were here first and blah, blah, blah. So there was very, very minor activity in the First and Second War in the Falkland Islands. There was some activity, but not much. But I read an interesting thing is some people had this crazy idea that the Japanese would come around South America and try to capture the Falkland Islands, which makes no sense at all, but they never did. They never did do that. Now, to administer this far off territory was costing Britain a lot of money. They had to have personnel there. They had to have transportation there. And Argentina was always demanding that the Falkland Islands be returned to them or be given to them. And Great Britain, in times of desperation, when they were really good and broke, they discussed the idea. They discussed the idea with Argentina. There were two times, even at the very beginning of the 1970s, they were talking about maybe having some sort of, we'll call it a joint, rule over the Falkland Islands. And then came the Falkland Islands War, which was in 1982. So after discussions had broken off between Argentina and Great Britain, the government of Argentina in those days was a military dictatorship. And the military dictatorships, like in Russia, which I would call the same idea, when times get rough, remember, it's not a democracy, so they have to bolster their status in public opinion by doing something brave. What they decided to do was to invade the Falkland Islands, to actually invade them. And they did, because they're so close and Great Britain is so far, most of it is empty. They invaded the Falkland Islands and took it over for 10 whole weeks. In other words, 2.5 months. The Argentines came into the Falkland Islands. They declared a curfew on the people. They said you can't go out at night. They put their stamp on the place. They beat up the young men who were living there. And they were saying, the people were telling us if we had to go out anywhere, we would have to have a flag with a stick with a white flag on, a white, material on it to show that we weren't armed and we didn't mean any wrong. So at that point, Great Britain had to decide, what do we do about this? Do we just say the hell with it? It's costing us money anyway, or not? And of course, Margaret Thatcher also was needing a boost in her leadership. And she said, no, we're going to go and get them back. We're going to fight and get them back. So it took them time to get together a navy and the airplanes and the aircraft carriers and all that stuff. And they Great Britain reinvaded the Falkland Islands. And there was one major battle, we'll call it. They sank an Argentinian battleship with 1,000 people aboard. And that about did it. Argentina surrendered. They left the island, not before they went ahead and took excrement and put it in all the people's mailboxes. So that was one of their little goodbye presents. And they also put mines, something like 30,000 mines they laid in and around the Stanley Harbor so that, it would be harder for people to come and take it back the territory. And of course, that was the end of the military dictatorship in Argentina. Because once you try something like this and it fails, right, what else do you have to offer the population? You were trying to distract their bad economy by doing this great foreign invasion, and then it fails. So that at that point, the military collapsed in Argentina, and a new period of democracy got started. So this would be again in the middle 1980s. The people in the Falkland Islands, of course, were thrilled to see the British come back and take over the islands. And because of that, Great Britain said, okay, the Falkland Islands, which are self-governing, they said, we want to prove to the world that the people in the Falkland Islands want to stay part of Great Britain. They held a referendum in the 90s, same time as we had our referendum here. And the result was 99.8% of the people, meaning every last one, just about, said we want to remain part of Great Britain. So the Falkland Islands is a self-governing territory. Great Britain provides defense and foreign relations, but the islands themselves are self-governing. The people on the islands average an income of $100,000 a person per year. They're not poor. They have lots of money. So where does it come from? It comes from the new rules which say that an island has a 200-mile exclusive, exclusive rights to develop the ocean around those islands. So in other words, they have the exclusive economic rights. That's what it is, EER, something like that, exclusive economic rights. And what that means is that anybody who wants to do anything within 200 miles of the Falkland Islands has to pay the Falkland Islands government a license fee. So what they do there is they fish. The main fish that they catch are squid and Chilean sea bass. So what we would call here Chilean sea bass. They don't call it that, but they call it something else. So that's one thing. And then they did oil exploration and they found some oil off the Falkland Islands, which they now have a producing oil production facility. They also have tourism, like how I came there in the summertime. So the people are doing really quite well. Now, one of the most interesting things that I learned of, if you imagine this desolate place with 3,600 people living there, they have no university. So when students finish high school, and if they want to go to university, they go to Great Britain for free university. Now think of it something like this. You have a 19, 17, 18-year-old boy or girl living on the Falkland Islands in the biggest town of 2,500 people, and they go off to Great Britain to university, right? It's like, imagine how the world is just so different. Now, here's my question to you. What are the chances that that person is going to ever come back to live in the Falkland Islands? You know what the answer is? 95% come back. Would you believe it? That's what they told me. Not only did they come back, but they bring their girlfriend, boyfriend, etc. to with them. So maybe it's true and maybe it's not true, but that's exactly what they told us, that most people do come back. Now they also have remember I said that they have mines, that the Argentinians put in mines. So there is a group of people who are expert mine deminers. These are people from Zimbabwe who had to deal with mines in their own country for a long time. So the British government brought in these Zimbabweans to take out all the mines. And then, believe it or not, this is a shock of shocks. The Zimbabweans wanted to stay in the Falkland Islands. Now you think of this place, it's so hard to describe to you. Imagine like a Newfoundland, which is like no trees, rocks, wind. Yes, they have beaches. The beaches are beautiful, except of course the water is 6 degrees. So some of these Zimbabweans stayed there, and I met some. They had Filipinos who came in because Filipinos are on ships all the time, and they also ended up living there. So there actually is a kind of a multi-racial group of people who live in the Falkland Islands. But most of the people are of British descent, and they're super British. It's like they're more British than the British, if you know what I mean. They have the pub, and they have their tea, and they have their darts. I said, like, what do people do here all winter long when tourists don't show up? He says, well, on Saturday night, we go to the pub and play darts. Okay, that's it, you know? But the description of how the people felt when the British troops came back was just beyond the beyond. Just amazing to hear, because all these people, remember, this happened in 1982, so you're talking 45 years ago, so anybody who's over 50 years old-ish remembers all this. And some of the people, I met one guy, he was in the British forces, and he met this girl from the Falkland Islands, and he stayed. That's how the people are, and they're very solid and very, very more British than the British, you could say that. So that's the state of the Falkland Islands these days. So I asked the people, oh, do you eat fish? You say, yeah, oh yeah, there's all these big commercial boats fishing. No, they don't eat fish at all. They eat beef and mutton, and that's what they eat, They have greenhouses that grow. You think you can grow tomatoes in the Falkland Islands? No, but in a greenhouse you could. So they have greenhouses that have cucumbers and spinach and all that kind of stuff. And, they have 2 flights a week to Great Britain. Remember, it's and I think they have to stop somewhere. I don't remember where they said they stopped, but if they have to go away like quick, they fly to Chile. So Chile is, because Argentina, forget it. Argentina, forget it. They won't give them the time of day. So they have to fly to Santiago, Chile, and Santiago, from there they can go anywhere around the world that they want to go to. They want to go on holidays, they go to Santiago, Chile. That's what they do. So that's why this competition is so intense between England and Argentina. And when you come to any Argentinian airport, the big one in Buenos Aires, the first thing you'll see is a map of Argentina with the Falkland Islands in a big, feature. Or they'll give the provinces of Argentina, and the Falkland Islands is one of the provinces of Argentina. So they haven't forgotten about it. And when they have this big monument in Buenos Aires to the people who were killed in the Falkland Islands War. And there isn't a single Argentinian alive who says that we should forget about it and the Falkland Islands don't belong to us. They all think otherwise. So that's the story between Argentina and Great Britain. So let me get into a little more. We've talked about the beginnings of Argentina and how it was so prosperous. And if you go to Buenos Aires, they call it the Paris of South America for a good reason. Looks like Paris. Beautiful. Beautiful buildings, architecture, art, not just a bunch of towers, steel towers with no features and no decorations. It's beautiful. I mean, it looks like you could say it looks like Paris used to look like. Those are all from the good old days. So what happened to bring it down so much? There's a combination of factors. One factor, and again, this is all politics. So you had in the 1930s, when things started to turn down, right? We had the Depression, the Great Depression in North America. The Great Depression happened there too, happened worldwide. And what they said was, what we have to do is protect the industries that we have. Argentina had a huge car industry, manufacturing automobiles. Companies like Ford and Volkswagen were super active in Argentina. And what they decided to do was to use I said I wouldn't talk about Trump, but I have to. The Trumpian method, tariffs. They discovered tariffs long before Trump did. So what they said is, in order to protect the industries that we have to put enormous tariffs on any imports of goods to Argentina, because that way the government will have money, number one, and we will keep out foreign competition, number two. This was the great theory that they had. Of course, it doesn't work, because what happens is that if you prevent competition from coming into a country, the companies that are already working there just can raise their prices because they know that they won't have any competition from imports. And that's what they did. So you have then an inefficient, not only raising the prices, but you could also make goods that are no good, because you can't make a better car coming into Argentina than the ones they already made, because they didn't allow them to come in. So there was no effort to improve quality, no effort to reduce prices, because they were living in a kind of a golden bubble as far as the industry is concerned. But of course, that wasn't giving the government enough money. So where could the government get more money? What they decided to do was to tax exports. Now figure that. Now taxing exports means, Argentina was producing a huge amount of grain and beef to be sold in Europe and even to be sold in America, as far as I can remember, the beef anyway, not the grain. But Argentina had that. Argentina also has a wine industry that developed in the wine growing areas of the country. If you know, what's the name of their wine? It's going to come to me. Wine, fruits, stuff like that. So they had a very prosperous agriculture, but the government needed the money. So what they said was, okay, for every, let's say, ton of grain that we're exporting, we're going to charge an export tax to the people doing the importation in order to raise money. So, when you try to do things like that, you're not the only game in town. Eventually, Europe, which only imported its own food because it couldn't grow enough, eventually they started growing enough food for themselves. So Argentina lost that customer because of mismanagement and corruption. We have to add in, corruption is always there. If you wanted a license to do something, you needed to pay off somebody. If you wanted to expand your business, you had to pay off somebody. And so between corruption, inefficiency, bad marketing, tariffs, the economy of Argentina gradually started to collapse. And then in order to keep up pretenses, the government couldn't say, oh, we made a mistake. We have to eat our losses. What the governments did, one after another, is borrow money and just hand it out in social welfare payments, hand it out in social allowances, hand it out to their supporters. And so the governments got more and more indebted. Foreign investors looked at Argentina and ran away because they said, who can operate in this type of situation? And gradually, the country just sank down more and more and more to the point where instead of people from Spain moving to Argentina, people from Argentina now moved to Spain. Instead of people from Great Britain moving to Argentina, people from Argentina moved to the US and to Canada and to other places around the world. And Jewish people moved to Israel from Argentina. So that describes then the kind of down slide of a country which has so much potential, which had so much to go for it, that in the 1920s and 30s, they were equal to Europe. And that is the reason why, by the way, so many Jewish people immigrated into Argentina. Argentina at one time had 400,000 Jewish people living there. It was, after the United States and the Soviet Union, it was the biggest Jewish community living in the whole world outside of Israel, because it was the wealth of the country which brought people in. And of course, those people themselves contributed to the wealth of the country. That population has now fallen in half because of immigration, mostly. It's still the largest community in South America. It still has loads of schools, community facilities, sports clubs, stuff like that. Mainly sort of a secular liberal outlook of the people. Ironically, of course, Argentina became the hiding place of Nazis who were leaving Germany at the end of the Second World War to look for a place to hide. And the leader of the country, Mr. Perón, he gave them sanctuary to go live in Argentina, again, for money, of course, corruption. And so you had at the same time, the country with the largest Jewish community in it and the country with the most Nazis in it at the end of the Second World War. And for all I know, they might have bumped into each other and never knew one from another, So after these years of they called it statism. In other words, a kind of where the state decides the main goals of the economy, the main direction of the economy, how to protect the economy. Mercantilism is another kind of description of what they were doing there. And Mr. Perón and his followers, although he was in office for 30 years, when he passed away, his followers kept on promoting his form of government, a kind of a hard-handed, we'll call it clientelism. In other words, if you show your loyalty to the government, we will pay you off, and we will continue protecting industries. The state has a big portion of the economy, taking over failing businesses, not letting them go out of business, but taking over failing businesses to keep jobs going. But then, of course, you have an inefficient government that owns all kinds of stuff that's not making money, that's losing money. So then you end up having to borrow more money, and you have to make more payments of interest to the international people who lend it to you. And it's a vicious circle. So the new president of the country, Mr. Milei, he was elected as a kind of a outsider, break all the rules kind of guy. He said that we have to stop all this business. We have to completely stop shoveling money out of the government coffers to anybody who asks for it. And we have to actually try to be serious about balancing our budget. Supported by the United States, he said, I'm a great friend of Mr. President. And what he did was he cut government expenses by a lot. He let go a lot of the workers for the government because so many of these people had jobs but didn't do anything. And he said we have to put some financial discipline into the country. And so the inflation rate, which was going to somewhere like 1,000% a year, the money which was worth nothing upon nothing upon nothing, I can say to you that I went to Argentina for a week when I was 60. Yeah, that's 18 years ago. And there were 4 pesos to the dollar at that point. Today, maybe 1,500 pesos to the dollar. So that just tells you how much the money has lost its value in that time. And so he's trying to turn over a new leaf. He's made inflation go way down, that's for sure. But so people don't have to worry that their money will not. When you have high inflation, what does it force people to do? To buy stuff. Buy stuff that they don't need. They can't even afford. But if I'm holding money in my pocket or in a bank account, it's going to be worth less in a week. I might as well spend it and buy something. But that just leads to more inflation because you're creating demand, and people who have goods to sell could say, well, I'm not going to sell it now. It's going to go up in price next week. I'll wait. I'll sell it for a higher price. So it's a kind of a vicious circle of inflation, which Argentina could not get itself out of. Now it's getting itself out of it, but at great cost. The cost is that the government is not supporting the people and the economy as much as it did. And so unemployment has gone up. But after a while, these medicines, these bitter medicines, do have an effect. And things are slowly starting to improve in the country after all this time. Let me just check my time here. Ooh, 3 o'clock. So I'm going to stop here for now. I actually had another subject to speak about, but I said, you know what, England, Argentina, they're playing today. So we'll speak about I wanted to speak about Africa because I was there for a month. I was there for a whole month, a month ago. So that's why I wanted to speak about that. So let me just ask if you have any questions at all. And then if you're interested in the game, you can get back and watch it. All crazy things. It's on Fox News. I think it's on something else too. I'm not sure. Listen, what is it on? ESPN, maybe? Oh, TSN. Oh, it's on CTV? Oh, okay. Good to know. Any questions, comments? Have any of you ever been to Argentina? Yeah, you. What did you think? Fascinating? Yeah. Okay. Right. You said you were there 6 times? You were there 6 times? Um, you what? You love Argentina. Yeah. Yeah. It is a beautiful place, but you know, when I was there 19 years ago, the one of the main shopping streets in Buenos Aires is called Florida Street, Calle Florida. And on Calle Florida, at that time, they had made to measure leather jackets. They had leather shoes. They had, it looked like the finest shopping window that you might see in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue. And if you go there now, which I was just there last year, it just looks like regular schlock that you would find all over the place. That's just an indication of what's happened to the economy in all those times. So thank you for coming. Please ask people who you know to come. And I'll see you all next week.